कथाकार, आपकी कहानी हमारी जुबानी. Yes, if you have a story, we will narrate it to the world. The Narrators India, Kalakshetra Global, Sat9 India and Rivers Publication presents कथाकार. और आज के कथाकार हैं राजन भतेजा, जो पढ़ने जा रहे हैं सोनिया चौहान की लिखी ये कहानी, जिसका नाम है नॉट इन टच.
A station before, the train had stopped and wouldn't move. I sighed and turned to the window. On the platform, several passengers flocked around the station master. He was wading through the crowd, flapping his arms like a drowning man. "Isn't that just perfect?" drawled the woman on the opposite berth. She wore an off-white sari with purple flowers at the border. Her brown hair was parted in the middle, plaited to one side. "They're not moving until tomorrow," she continued, staring at me with murky brown eyes. I rubbed my eyes and shoved my feet into the sandals. A few people were entering the train again, going past us, talking about how the train wouldn't go any further. I snapped on my wristwatch and lugged my suitcase from under the berth. "Kahan chale?" asked the nosy lady. "I have to be at Kathgodam." "Is it a wedding or a funeral?" she asked, not showing 1 inch of hesitancy. "A funeral," I replied quietly. "Who?" she asked casually, as if asking for the time. I ignored her and shuffled out of the train. The 5 a.m. November air rushed through my nose, making my eyes water. The taxi stand was deserted. After half an hour, a white ambassador arrived. I lunged for the passenger door. "Arey hato, this is a private taxi," the driver said. "Bhaiya, please take me. I must reach Kathgodam before 7 o'clock. It's my..." I stopped, and the words not letting themselves out of my mouth. It was so hard to say it out loud. That on a Thursday evening, just as my plane had touched down on Indian soil, Ma had died. My father had called me when I was at the baggage belt. After hanging up, my first thought was I not even on this earth when she had breathed her last? How far away was I from her? "No, she wasn't keeping fine actually," he had said. "A week ago, they shifted her to the ICU. No, it wasn't serious. They didn't want to bother me. Anyway, I was busy jet setting across the world closing deals." A voice cut through my thoughts, like someone threw a pebble into a lake. "Come, we'll drop you." It was a brown-haired co-passenger from the train. The taxi rutted and meandered through the hills. After a while, she took out a metal flask and a packet of masala from her purse. She mixed the masala in the flask and drank from it. The smell of pani puri burst through the tiny cabin of the car. My stomach rumbled. Despite me not standing with Ma holding her hand when she closed her eyes on this world, despite the agony that seared through me since yesterday, despite everything else that had gone wrong, my stomach rumbled. And just like that, the tears arrived. At first, I gave a sniffle. Then a huge sob choked my throat. I jammed a fist under my nose. The harder I tried to stop it, the harder I cried. The woman watched my breakdown. She rummaged through her purse and took out a tiny steel cup. She poured the pani puri water into it and held it out to me. "It'll be all right," she said. "It won't. I've not been home for 5 years. And now my mother's dead. Nothing's going to be okay ever again," I said. not caring anymore what she thought of me. Why didn't you go home? Because I don't care. What else could be the reason? Pine trees passed outside the window. She watched them as she replied, everybody cares. We just act like we don't. And sometimes we keep acting throughout our life. So the question is, why do you act like you don't care? Now, it was me who looked out the window. In the distance, dawn was slowly breaking over the hills. I had an elder brother. He married someone without telling us. My mother couldn't accept this, and they kept fighting over it for years. My parents, they never even met her. I always got caught up in their fights. Eventually, I got tired and started to avoid it. I stopped picking my brother's calls and I would rarely visit my parents. But then, she prompted. Life happened. I cracked an ugly grin. My brother died in an accident, and now there's one more person I didn't reach when they left forever. All this while, every time someone asked me about my family, I would always say, we are not in touch so much. And people just nodded along. And I carried on with the conversation like nothing strange had taken place. I wonder now, was it really that easy to shrug off my family? What will I do now? Am I supposed to just go on with life like before, knowing there is no one left to ignore? I drank the sweet sour water and looked at her profile as she sipped from the flask too. She had a stern face, except her brown eyes that glistened like wet earth. She didn't seem prying now that I had spilled my guts out before her. She said, my husband drank pani puri water when he was upset, so I always carry this masala with me. Whenever I miss him, I drink it and for a moment it feels like he's sitting next to me, urging me to look for the joy and to keep going. I frowned. But why pani puri water? She looked me in the eye and said, it was a childhood thing. His mother taught him that life will show you every sour shade. It's upon you to stir in the sweetness. He said something like, why have a plain life when you can have a pani puri life? I finished for her. Yes, Ma used to say that all the time. Over the din of the ambassador's engine, we stared at each other. After a moment, she broke the silence. You look so much like him. You know that, right?
So this was our story, Not in Touch. Written by Sonia Chauhan and narrated by राजन भटेजा। अगली बार आपके सामने एक नई कहानी, एक नई आवाज लेकर फिर हाजिर होंगे आपके अपने पॉडकास्ट कथाकार पर। आपकी कहानी हमारी जुबानी, आपके किरदार और हम बने हिस्सेदार।